Neil for the introduction. How are you? Are you tired?
No.
No? We're going to have a very relaxed talk about an inspiring subject, which is wine, but don't smell it and don't taste it just yet. Do you like wine?
Yes.
Everybody likes wine. Has a wine ever changed your life? It actually has mine, and I wanted to tell you that story, the story of that incredible wine that changed my life, because it has a lot to do with our topic today, which is senses. And the story goes, it was this wine, which I am honored and privileged to let you taste tonight as well, so that I can share the experience with you. It's a wine from Italy, from Tuscany, Fontalloro. And the story goes, I had a bottle waiting for some friends to come over and to share with them. And I was standing by the window and I opened that bottle and I poured the wine into a carafe and I poured myself a glass of that wine to taste. Now, some of you might have gone to something like a wine class, or maybe you go to tutored wine tastings and you see colleagues of mine that tell you how you should do it. First, you look at the wine, then you smell the wine, and then you taste the wine. It's the sacred order of wine tasting. So first the eye, then the nose, and then the palate, which are already 3 out of the 5 basic senses. So let's adopt that order for tonight and just see what we can get out of it. And let's first look at that wine. It's a little dark in this room, so just for that to be easier to you, I took a photo of that wine. Now, can anyone tell me what this color is? It's really quite dark in this room. Any ideas? Bordeaux color. It's an Italian wine, not French, but okay. Any other suggestions? Now, this wine is made from the Sangiovese grape from Tuscany, which is supposed to be looking like this, which we would say is a dark ruby color. It's hard to say in this room, but this wine is actually a little darker. This is a photo of the same wine that I took earlier today. It really is quite a dark color. So 12 years ago, when I was standing at my window, I was just thinking, what kind of color is that? How do I describe that color? Is it very dark ruby? Is it very dark purple? Is it very dark violet? Or is it maybe black? So I took a notebook and a pen and I started jotting down my proposals. And that's an article that I actually wrote at that time about this wine, with the clumsy translation into English. And so, scarlet, it's a bit darker than that. Garnet, it's a bit redder than that. Purple, violet, not quite. Very, very dark ruby. I thought it was a more complex color. It was a color like it had more colors into one color. So how do you describe that? And I thought of a metaphor, because I thought this color was looking very dark, but also as if it was darkened. So my next best guess was, it's a scarlet color over which the sun has set. So there is no more light coming into that color and it becomes darker. Do you like that metaphor? I didn't. I thought it was still not quite that. So I used another. Now, what is purple color connected with? The Pope wears purple, or the cardinals. So I thought, they are old guys, and maybe they wear that purple color, but they're sort of, saddened at growing older, and maybe that's it. Still not quite what I had in my glass and what you have in yours, even though the lighting is very poor. So I thought maybe it's actually a black color that became a little lighter. How can we make a color lighter? You put a lot of lights, illuminate the color from within. And the black becomes sort of lighter, but I still wasn't really happy. And then I remembered, I know this color. Where did I see that color? And do you know this lady? It's Venus, painted by Tintoretto some 550 years ago in Venice. Now, Tintoretto was a great painter, and I really like him because he had a great use of color, and he really liked very dark colors. Now, look at the cushion on which she is lying. It's a pretty dark ruby purple, but still not exactly the same color. Tintoretto would use those colors rather often, especially when he was painting naked ladies. It had a sort of erotic connotation to it. Interesting, you see, just a glass of red wine, but a lot more meaning is coming into it. Now, this is a family portrait, no nakedness, and that's coming close to that color, very, very dark purple. So I took my notebook and I wrote, this is the color of Tintoretto, which was a precise way of putting it, as precise as I could get. But what does it mean? It's a color that only happened once in history. Only when Tintoretto painted that color, it happened. Now you see, at first it seems something pretty simple, but the color of wine can often be quite complex, a little bit more complex than we think. Now we can get to stage 2 and actually smell the wine and tell me what kind of smell is that? What fruits does it smell of? I want 3 best guesses here.
Plums.
Plums.
Black currants.
Black currants, very good. What else?
Wood.
Yeah, wood, yeah. We'll come to that. Now, I thought it was more like blackberries. But it's a little bit more complex than that. I thought it's not quite like fresh raspberries, it's more like maybe this. Blackberry jam. And then it became suddenly, I was standing at that window, friends were late, I was sipping that wine, or smelling that wine, and suddenly it felt quite emotional, because again I thought, I know the smell, I remember the smell, where does it come from? Now, when I was a child, I used to go with my parents on holidays to the woods, to the Polish lakes. So we would have a tent, we would bivouac in the woods, and what do you do in the woods when you're 5 or 6? You go with your parents to pick blackberries, blueberries, and raspberries. So we would pick an entire basket of these fruits, go back to the tent, and my father and my mother would cook jam. So I suddenly had a glimpse, this is the smell, I know the smell, but it became very complicated, because when you are in the woods, you don't only have the smell of the jam, you have the smell of the woods, you have the smell of rain, you have the smell of the lake. And suddenly all those smells were in that glass. This is me, my sister and my father in 1982 in the woods, and we are tasting blackberry jam that has just been cooked. And when I was remembering that, it felt suddenly quite complicated also emotionally. It was a joyful moment because I remembered those very happy days. And it was a very, very sad moment because I will never go again to the woods with my parents and my sister and cook blackberry jam. So I was feeling more and more ambiguous about this wine. I just wanted to have a glass of red wine, and suddenly it was becoming much more complex. Also because there is more to that smell than just blackberries or blackberry jam. Wood, very good, I agree. All good red wines are aged in wood, in oak barrels. These are the actual oak barrels of this producer. But it's not the smell of oak barrels, if any of you has ever smelled an oak barrel. I thought it was more like old wood. Maybe this old wood, like you have old furniture. We had something very similar at home. You remember that smell, or maybe you remember the old university library before they constructed that horrible concrete monster. It was such a nice place because it had the smell of old wood and old books. And again, a bit of that smell was in the wine. So I was standing at the window, becoming sort of, very emotional about that wine. I had that Proustian moment. Do you remember Proust? He was having tea and a cake, and biting into the cake, he remembered his entire life. Now, aromas can do that, and how strange. We think of aromas, it's a quantum of data. It's like a binary bit of data that we get. No, not at all. Aromas can be, today we would say, like tags. You have a blog post, you click on the tag, and you see everybody that's ever been written on blackberries. So you can have the smell of a blackberry in a wine, and suddenly it becomes connected to so many, many things. But wine isn't meant only to be smelled, so now we can finally taste the wine, enjoy, and tell me what is that taste. Do you enjoy that wine? I think it's a really nice wine. So what is the dominant taste? Just give me a few tags.
Taste of wine.
Yeah, very good answer. It tastes of red wine. I agree. But I think it's a little bit more complex than that. Yes, it tastes of the same fruits that we had before. Plums, cherries, blackberries. But there is something more. Now, what is that more? It first tasted earthy to me, slightly dry, tannins, the same thing that you have in black tea. Now, this is where a little bit of context helps. Why does it taste earthy? What is it reminiscent of? This is the label of the wine. It has that little image on it. What is that? Sorry? It is an old town, yes, absolutely. Actually, a very, very old town. It goes back to Etruscan times. People we know nothing about that lived where we live 2,500 years ago. This is the vineyard where this wine comes from. It's a picture in the winter. It's in Tuscany. Now, Tuscany, it's this idyllic place. It's got cypress trees, olive groves, wonderful vineyards. Rich people go there on holiday. Tony Blair, Angelina Jolie, you name them. Very expensive hotels. A super place to be in. It's actually a little bit more complex than this. Now, close up, you see there are some buildings in that vineyard. There's something very strange. I once went to that vineyard, came close, and they have a granary, an old stone place where in ancient times they would keep whatever they produced, olive oil, maybe some tools. But very strange place. Look at this granary. Does it look like a normal granary? No. It's a fortress. Now, why on earth would you put a fortress in your vineyard? Answer is, because people come to kill you. And this is what people did in Italy for 1,000 years. In the Middle Ages, there would be war all the time, between the towns. Civil war all the time. Actually very horrible. 6 kilometers from that vineyard where this wine comes from is this. The battlefield of Montaperti, which was the most horrible battle in the Middle Ages in 1260 between Siena and Florence. They were fighting for power, territory. 40,000 people died in that battle. Young people, nice young chaps, Italian, good-looking guys. Probably all had families, enjoyed wine. They were all killed. Now, why do I mention this? Because this wine actually tastes of blood. When I tasted it for the first time, I thought, it's got this sort of slightly metallic taste when you cut yourself. Take your finger into your mouth, and it's, that's that sort of taste. very strange in the red wine. And another very strange coincidence that sort of had me thinking. I told you before the name of the grape from which this wine is made, Sangiovese, which means the blood of Jupiter. Now, how strange. You name a grape the blood of Jupiter. What does it mean? First of all, Jupiter never existed, we know that. So, whose blood? Why a grape is named after blood? Maybe it's the blood of Christ. You drink red wine in the church. The blood of God. Jupiter was a god. Or maybe the blood of men. Christ was God, men. Men were killed in the vineyards. Blood of men in your glass. Suddenly, so complicated. I just wanted a glass of red wine. But the senses were leading me always far afield from the actual commodity beverage that we all drink, the Chilean Merlot that you buy from the supermarket. Now, why was that? Because aromas, flavors, are not just aromas and flavors, they are meanings. A wine is a story. A wine, through all these meanings that you can find in the aromas and the flavors, can become a symbol. And a very evocative one, because I can, of course, write that story down. I can write a short story about young boys being killed in Montaperti and, etc. But when you take a glass of this wine to your nose and you taste it, it comes to you with much more immediacy because it's in you. You can touch it, you can taste it. It's much more powerful than words. So flavors are much more powerful meanings than words. And to elaborate on that story, I wanted to tell you another very interesting about a chef. Massimo Bottura, considered the best chef in Italy now, and just voted #3 chef in the world by the top 50 ranking of San Pellegrino. Now, a chef is just a guy who cooks lunch and dinner, right? Like we do. Massimo Bottura is a fantastic guy. He's actually a real philosopher of food. When you go to his restaurant, and I was lucky enough to do that in the winter, he talks to you for 40 minutes about what you are going to eat. A very inspired guy, wine can be inspiring and food can be inspiring. A very inspired guy. And I was there sitting, and what struck me was very strange. He would talk over and over about his grandmother. She taught him how to cook. She was the person who most loved him when he was a boy, who really cared about him. And in his cooking now, he's the greatest chef of Italy, he is trying to recreate the impulses, the sensory impulses that he got from his grandmother. Very strange. Aromas and flavors connect you back with time. So we started with a glass of red wine. I just want to have a drink. A simple quantum of color, a simple quantum of aroma. And suddenly, we go back 30 years, like I did in the woods, he does with his grandmother. And he does incredible things, but the one dish that he cooked that I thought was most stupendous was actually his most conservative one, and it was roast guinea fowl. Now why? Because this is the sort of thing that you get in Italy on Sundays. It's the equivalent of the British Sunday roast, Grandma invites you for lunch, and she cooks, she roasts a guinea fowl. So he wanted to recreate this in honor, in homage to his grandmother, and but he said, there's one big problem with the roast guinea fowl. It's not very nice, because when you roast that bird in the oven, it gets quite dry. It can get really dry and not very tasty. So you can't serve something like this in a 3-star restaurant. So what he did, he divided the guinea fowl into pieces, and he fried the breasts just perfect, 40 seconds. Then he cooked the leg, confit, delicious, fantastic meat. He had a little bit of the liver prepared in another way. Actually, I have a photo of this. very nice sauce, some extras. It was just gorgeous looking, fantastic food, just great. People loved it, but Massimo didn't. Something was missing. He was not happy. What was missing?
Wine.
Hmm?
Wine.
No, he has wine. He has very good wine. He has a great cellar. No, the smell was missing. Now, what happens when your grandmother invites you over for roast duck or roast guinea fowl? You sit at the table, wine is in the glass, everybody's chatting, and then grandma opens the oven. And that most incredible smell of roast guinea fowl, roast chicken, roast duck gets everywhere in the room. And then Massimo said, this was my best memory from my childhood. Sitting at the table with my family, and she opens the oven. But when you have the leg and the breast and the liver separately, you don't have the smell. So what did he do? He took another guinea fowl, he roasted it in the oven so it became completely dry and tasteless, and then he distilled the smell. He put it in a vaporizer like for perfume, and then he comes over to your table at his restaurant and he and suddenly it becomes complete. The dish becomes perfect. It gets that one missing element that it didn't have before, the smell of childhood. So what I learned speaking to Massimo at that time was that smells, aromas and flavors are much more than just themselves. They are time vehicles. We go back in time to see who we were, who we are, maybe who we are going to be. They are the most powerful and inspiring thing that you can have in life. A time vehicle, time capsule, just fantastic. Flavors are the fabric of our life. Thank you very much.